Glenn Beck.
The Blaze Radio Network.
There was a Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War, World War I and World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam War, the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Desert Storm. But the longest-running war in the history of this planet is the war on women. I mean, if we're to believe the media and the left, and it is being waged exclusively by people like you, the right. Some, including a number of women, are not even aware that there is a Republican war on women. Actress Lisa Kudrow, for example.
Do you feel that the Republican war on women is still an important issue to voters?
The Republican war on women?
That's what it says. Do you feel that the Republican war on women is still an important issue to voters?
There's a Republican war on women?
Yeah.
The answer, Lisa, is no. There is not a Republican war on women, so bless you that even an actress in the leftist world of Hollywood hysteria, she was so very unaware of this nonsensical non-issue. Yet, Bill Maher attempts to explain the concept to her.
Well, I think he's referring back to... Now, this is something the Republicans did improve upon, I must say. Back in 2010, they were the legitimate rape people. They could not stop talking about ladies' private parts.
Consider that quote for just a minute. Back in 2010, they were the legitimate rape people? Being legitimate rape people would certainly seem to imply that you've legitimately actually raped someone, wouldn't it? Instead, Maher alleges that what made them legitimate rape people was that they could not stop talking about ladies' private parts. First of all, call me crazy, but I consider talking a separate and distinct issue from actually raping. In reality, what took place in 2010 was that two little-known Republicans clumsily spoke about issues related to rape. And that was the sum total of Republicans being legitimate rape people. But it's rhetoric like that that has created the hysteria surrounding this so-called war on women. So nonsensical is this issue that during the 2012 Republican primary debates, ABC News' George Stephanopoulos directed this bizarre question to Mitt Romney.
Governor Romney, do you believe that states have the right to ban contraception, or is that trumped by a constitutional right to privacy?
George, this is an unusual topic that you're raising. States have a right to ban contraception. I can't imagine a state banning contraception. I can't imagine the circumstances where a state would want to do so. And if I were a governor of a state or a legislator of a state, I would totally and completely oppose any effort to ban contraception. So you're asking, given the fact that there's no state that wants to do so, and I don't know of any candidate that wants to do so, you're asking, could it constitutionally be done? We can ask our constitutionalist here.
I'm sure, Congressman Paul.
Okay, come on back.
Asking you, do you believe that states have that right or not?
George, I don't know whether the state has a right to ban contraception. No state wants to. I mean, the idea of you putting forward things that states might want to do that no state wants to do and asking me whether they could do it or not is kind of a silly thing, I think.
All of this is not to say that there has never been issues concerning women's rights. Women have, over time, had cause for concern. Of course, we all know that. There was a time in this country when women couldn't even vote. However, that wasn't a Republican issue. That was a societal issue. Commonly referred to as women's suffrage, the fight for women's right to vote began around 1830. It really heated up in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the effort culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution in 1920. Tennessee was the last state needed to ratify the amendment, and it passed there by a single vote. The United States was one of the very first nations on the planet to recognize the right of women to vote. As early as 1718 in the U.S., in Pennsylvania, married women were allowed to own and manage property in their own name during the incapacity of their spouse, but it was a start. It may surprise some to know that in 1840, the Republic of Texas allowed married women to own property in their own name. Period. The same thing applied in Maine and Maryland, with the provision that they couldn't control the land they owned. All of which sounds ridiculous to us today, but 180 years ago, these were huge steps. Most of the rights obtained by women in the 1800s were obtained in the United States. By 1855, the University of Iowa became co-ed. Elsewhere in the world, these things were unheard of. When referring to things like abortion, progressives like to claim that since the Supreme Court ruled on the issue, it's settled law, thus ending the debate for all time. However, 100 years before abortion was settled law, the issue of a woman's right to vote also became settled law with the Supreme Court, ruling in 1874 that women had no right to vote. In Missouri, a woman named Virginia Minor decided that it was definitely time for her and her fellow women to vote. She sued for the right, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided in Minor versus Happersett that Missouri law limiting the right to vote to male citizens is constitutional. The court rejected the claim by Minor that state law deprives her of one of the privileges or immunities of citizenship in violation of the 14th Amendment. Amazingly, the court ruled that while women are people under the 14th Amendment, they are in a special category of non-voting people, and states may grant or deny them the right to vote. So, really, let's stop with the Supreme Court settled law. Since 1920, the front lines of this war have often involved contraception and abortion. Supposedly fighting for the life of an unborn baby is exactly denying a woman their reproductive rights, when in fact, the protection of the life inside the womb is actually ensuring the completion of that reproductive right. In addition, it is safe to assume that just over half of the lives saved by not aborting babies would one day grow up to be women. In 2012, Georgetown University law student Sandra Fluke testified to Congress about the hardships faced by female students over contraception.
Without insurance coverage, contraception, as you know, can cost a woman over $3,000 during law school. For a lot of students who, like me, are on public interest scholarships, that's practically an entire summer's salary. 40% of the female students at Georgetown Law reported to us that they struggled financially as a result of this policy. One told us of how embarrassed and just powerless she felt when she was standing at the pharmacy counter and learned for the first time that contraception was not covered on her insurance, and she had to turn and walk away because she couldn't afford that prescription. Women like her have no choice but to go without contraception. Just last week, a married female student told me that she had to stop using contraception because she and her husband just couldn't fit it into their budget anymore. Women employed in low-wage jobs without contraceptive coverage face this same choice.
It costs $3,000 for birth control while attending law school? I have to be frank with you, that's either an awful lot of sex or you're buying your birth control devices at Tiffany's. First of all, to believe that the United States government should have any role whatsoever in assisting Americans to have sexual relations is preposterous. It's not just unconstitutional, it's unthinkable. And second, even without any government involvement or even insurance company contributions, birth control can be obtained incredibly cheaply and in many cases, absolutely free. Over the years, the war on women has become a charged political flashpoint.
Imagine paying 20% more for a cup of coffee just because you're a woman. So why does Congress think it's okay that women get paid 20% less than a man for doing the same job? I'll fight for pay equity to protect Planned Parenthood, choice for women, and expand paid and family leave. Now, some politicians will belittle this as a women's agenda. More proof that we just need more women in Congress. I'm Kathleen Matthews, and I approve this message.
The fact that women earn 79 cents for every dollar a man makes is continually cited. But even the Washington Post has attempted to dispel this falsehood. They've written about it every year since 2012 and have most recently given the claim the dreaded two Pinocchios. There's a multitude of factors to consider. One of them is that the average man has more experience in the workplace than the average woman, and experience is one factor that plays a big role in determining pay. The Washington Post also notes that women tend to leave the workforce for periods to raise children, to seek jobs that may have more flexible hours but lower pay, and choose careers that tend to have lower pay. By the way, BLS data shows that women who have never married have virtually no wage gap. In 2011, economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis noted that women may prefer to accept jobs with lower wages but greater benefits, more flexible parental leave, for instance. Excluding such fringe benefits from the calculation would exaggerate the wage disparity. In 2013, in an article from the Daily Beast citing a Georgetown University survey on economic value of different college majors, it showed that 9 out of the 10 most remunerative majors, such as petroleum and aerospace engineering, were dominated by men, while 9 of the 10 least paying majors, such as social work and early childhood education, were dominated by women. Again, when comparing similar education, experience, skill level, women earn about the same as men, and in some industries, slightly more. There are certain societies on this planet where a case can be made that a type of war on women actually exists, but the media doesn't want to talk about that one. But we will. There is a war on women happening. But if you listen to those on the left, the biggest offender is, say it with me, the United States of America. The World Economic Forum released their list of the world's best countries for women, and the U.S. was 45th. So let me give you a couple of highlights on the list. Rwanda was the 5th best nation on earth for women. Yeah, Rwanda. 40 places above the United States. Rwanda. One of the criteria used to arrive at that conclusion is the percentage of women in the Rwandan legislature. According to WEF, 64% of the seats in the Rwandan parliament are occupied by women. Just a side note, after the Rwandan genocide, 70% of their population was women. So it seems to go to reason that it would. Anyway, one of the reasons the U.S. is listed as low as it is the ever-present income inequality argument. As we have discussed over and over, including by the liberal newspaper The Washington Post, there are many extenuating factors that go into why overall men earn more money than women. To name a few, different professional choices, maternity leave, length of time in the job market, and a whole lot more. But boiled down, when you compare men and women with similar education levels, similar job experience, length of time in a particular job, and skill levels, in other words, when comparing apples to apples, in America, men and women make virtually the same amount of money. In fact, in some industries, when those factors are considered, women's actual average income is slightly more than men. In 2010, Time magazine reported that there was 147 of the 150 biggest cities in the country, and the median full-time salaries of young single women were higher than their male peers by 8%. Another criteria used to rate the United States lower than you might think it should be in the quality of life for women is the participation rate for women in the job force, because it's stagnant. Is there a definitive explanation for that? No, not that I can think of. But could one reason be that many women are choosing to stay home to raise their children full time? Of course. Since when are women who raise children second-class citizens? Since when do we say our quality of life is because everyone in the family works? Is the World Economic Forum going to inform America's children that they're just not important enough to warrant a parent staying in the home to raise them? Or Will they inform our next generation that they don't deserve the time and attention of their own parents? Or maybe they should just admit some people choose to stay home with their kids and it's not a bad choice. Rarely, if ever, is actual oppression and violence against women even mentioned, such as when it exists under Sharia law. Even in the supposedly westernized, tolerant Dubai in the UAE, the situation for women can be extremely hazardous. Charlotte Adams, she was visiting Dubai from London. She greeted a male friend in the bar in Dubai with a kiss on the cheek to say hello. Well, when she left the bar, the Dubai police stopped her.
He was like, "Were you kissing him?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Did you kiss him?" And I was like, "Well, we would have kissed on the cheek to say hi." But apparently, as soon as I said we kissed on the cheek, that was it. It was like, kissing on the cheek is illegal.
Charlotte spent 23 days behind bars before being deported.
Charlotte actually got off easy. The 27-year-old Australian Elisa Ghali went to Dubai to manage a hotel and spa. She had a room in the hotel she managed, and one night her room became flooded. It turned out later that someone had intentionally stuffed a T-shirt in the plumbing to cause the overflow. While the workers fixed her room, she waited in the bar. A co-worker came by, dropped some ice cubes in her drink. The next thing she remembers is waking up naked and badly bruised with 4 broken ribs. She had been raped by 3 men. Alicia went to the hospital for treatment and to alert the police.
What Alicia didn't know is that being raped was essentially the same as having sex outside marriage where the sex is consensual, and that she would be charged with the same offence as those who assaulted and raped her.
Alicia was quickly learning firsthand about the real war on women from an Australian documentary on the case.
So, a woman can only prove that she has been raped if there are 4 adult Muslim men watching the rape.
Who are prepared to say that the sex was non-consensual.
Alicia Ghali spent 8 months in that Dubai prison before being released during a Muslim holiday celebration. In 2008, a 13-year-old Somali girl named Alicia Dehulau reported to authorities that she had been gang raped. Instead of receiving justice, she was stoned to death by 50 men. Sharia courts in Pakistan have punished thousands of raped women who dare accuse their attacker with imprisonment. In Bangladesh, female victims are flogged, beaten, and imprisoned after being raped. In Afghanistan, it's possible that a daughter who had been raped will be honor-killed by her parents. In 2014, the International Women's Group intervened on behalf of a 10-year-old girl who had been raped by her mullah in a mosque. Their job? To persuade her family not to kill her. Good news, so far the family has not. But in Nigeria, 200 schoolgirls were kidnapped out of their school and sold into sex slavery because their extremist captors believed they had the right to do it, since the girls were being educated. Hashtags popped up for the girls here in America, but nothing was ever really accomplished in their behalf. So there is a war on women. Severe human rights violations directed against women all over the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world, and virtually no one seems to focus on it. Meanwhile, in the United States, the so-called war often involves whether or not free birth control devices are available on every street corner.
One told us of how embarrassed and just powerless she felt when she was standing at the pharmacy counter and learned for the first time that contraception was not covered on her insurance, and she had to turn and walk away because she couldn't afford that prescription. Women like her have no choice but to go without contraception. Just last week, a married female student told me that she had to stop using contraception because she and her husband just couldn't fit it into their budget anymore.
Perspective should be the word of the year. Perspective. It would be helpful. At least when we have to answer the question, is life perfect for women? Of course not. Not here or anywhere else. It's not perfect for men either. But it might be helpful to take a breath and look around from time to time to see, if you were looking to America from the outside, how perfect a woman's life may look to them. We'll seek to gain some of that perspective.
If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong, I am invincible, I am a woman.
Such was the popular refrain from singer Helen Reddy, among others, in the 60s and 70s. I Am Woman was one of the biggest hits in 1971. For thousands of years, the roles of men and women had seemed to be pretty well defined and, for the most part, accepted. Generally speaking, men were the hunter-gatherers and women were the nurturers. But society changed, and it took some time to adapt to that change. And as transitions can get, this one was occasionally rocky. There was a time in between when popular culture made it seem that the most important task a woman had was just to make a good cup of coffee for her man.
Your coffee, sir.
Thanks, beautiful.
You're welcome.
How can such a pretty wife make such bad coffee?
I heard that.
Judy, what brings you over?
Oh, Mrs. Olson, Frank crabbed about my coffee again.
Oh, is coffee a problem?
Sure is. I can't make good coffee.
Good coffee's no problem.
If you use the coffee with better flavor. Folgers. Folgers coffee?
And for the love of heaven, whatever you do, don't let the little lady drive.
Depending on how you drive and your car's condition, you can get incredible mileage from the Goodyear Custom Wide Tread Polyglass tire.
I've got 32,000 miles on my tires.
I've got 41,000 miles on my Polyglass. But Polyglass means more than mileage when your wife has to drive alone. When a woman's at the wheel, Polyglass means more than mileage.
In the midst of all the social upheaval over the roles of men and women, ads and attitudes like these just ignited the spark of social change that led to the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s. One of the most famous protests during the movement took place in Atlantic City. It happened during the Miss America pageant in 1968.
To the feminists, the annual television beauty pageant seemed a gross offense.
Miss Illinois is Miss America. We are going to sing your song. Oh, there she is, Miss America.
Inside, one set of young women accepted the chauvinist baubles. Outside, others carried on with more consciousness raising.
Women were everywhere, burning their bras and demanding equal rights.
We threw bras and girdles and stockings, high-heeled shoes and cosmetics into the trash can. The press loved it, and we learned very early on that the press liked crazy things, so let's use the press.
As legendary and worldwide as the bra-burning event was, it is interesting that the actual bra burning never really happened.
We didn't burn any bras. They would have happened if they had allowed us to have a fire.
The stunts got the coverage they wanted, but at some risk to their reputation.
For those who think that the women's liberation movement is a joke vaguely connected with burning bras and getting in the men-only bars, may I disabuse you of that notion. It is about equal pay and equal opportunity in the job market.
Protesters tossed their underwear into a large trash can labeled the Freedom Trash Can. But without permits, the clothing was never burned. They're real rebels. The movement was definitely still making news.
In America, they'd started to burn their bras and a women's movement had already begun. We thought, if they can do it, we have to do it in Holland.
But the coverage wasn't always popular.
50 years ago today, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution gave women the right to vote. On this anniversary, a militant minority of women's liberationists was on the streets across the country to demand equal employment.
It turned out there really weren't a lot of would-be liberated women willing to stop their work for the day in New York. Early demonstrations tended to be small, and the onlookers were by no means always sympathetic.
It seemed that almost no one was opposed to women having equal opportunities for employment and compensation under equal circumstances. But with abortion on demand thrown in on top of it, along with many questions of equal access to all public bathroom facilities, and the even more concerning prospect of women being drafted into the military service and placed on the front lines of battlefields, the ERA amendment became much, much tougher to sell to the American people. William Buckley discussed some of these issues with ERA opponent Phyllis Schlafly.
The state of Connecticut ratified the so-called Equal Rights Amendment. The proposed constitutional amendment, passed overwhelmingly by the Senate and the House, holds that, quote, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. That doesn't sound particularly subversive, and I would therefore like to begin by asking Mrs. Schlafly to state her principal objection to ERA.
Well, it's the very innocuous wording of the amendment that is the reason why many people didn't realize in the beginning what unfortunate consequences it would have. But fortunately, the amending process calls for a full-blown debate in the state legislatures around the country, and this is where we find out some of the things that were not originally realized by many people who voted for it. We find, as we look into the matter, that ERA won't give women anything which they haven't already got or have a way of getting. But on the other hand, it will take away from women some of the most important rights and benefits and exemptions we now have.
What would be an example of that?
Well, a great glaring example on which there's full agreement between both the proponents and the opponents is the matter of the draft. Women are exempt from the draft. Selective service says only young men of age 18 have to register. But the Equal Rights Amendment will positively make women subject to the draft and on an equal basis with men. Nor could you have a system whereby the women would get all the nice, easy desk jobs and the men get all the fighting jobs. It would have to be equal across the board, in combat, on warships, and all up and down the line.
Vice Chairman Ann Scott.
There is no question that if the Equal Rights Amendment is passed, that women would become subject to the draft. However, I think that we have a situation now where the draft is going by the boards. And furthermore, I think the question is not one of the rights of women here, but it is the question of the draft. Clearly, no sane parent would want to see either child, either a son or a daughter, subject to the draft. But if women are to be citizens and citizens are to be subject to the draft, then women should take the responsibilities as well as the rights of citizenship. But it's not simply a question of being subject to the draft. It is also a question of denial of opportunity. There are many situations in which women could benefit from the draft. They already are in the service.
You might become a war hero.
Why not?
Yeah.
No matter how enlightened society was or wasn't during the 1970s, the idea of America's daughters being drafted into military service and placed on the front lines of a combat situation just didn't sit well for most Americans. Despite some impressive and possibly unlikely supporter over the years, including the Republican President of the United States in 1975,
women's liberation is truly the liberation of all people. Let 1975, International Women's Year, be the year that ERA is ratified.
Obviously, 1975 was not that year, even with Gerald Ford's endorsement, nor was any other year. Without the passage of the constitutional amendment, did women's rights falter and die? Are women more oppressed than they ever have been? Or do they have more rights and freedoms than at any other time in the history of all mankind?
Despite all the challenges we face, I remain convinced that yes, the future is female. Just look at the amazing energy we saw last month as women organized a march that galvanized millions of people all over our country and across the world.
So which is it? Is there a war on women? Or is the future female? And what exactly does the future is female mean? Hillary Clinton and others have expended a lot of time and energy selling the war on women, so this new phrase would seem a little out of step with that effort. But it's important to note that this new phrase and effort comes complete with another attempt to pass the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. The initial effort to get the ERA added to the U.S. Constitution never happened, but there are many that say it wasn't necessary in the first place.
If the Equal Rights Amendment passes, we'd have no choice. Under the draft, women would be drafted and forced into combat.
And the president is staunchly against it. The club begins a new era. That's ERA, not ERA. ERA supporters have a tough time keeping the debate focused on what they see as ERA's main goal, economic equality for women who in 1982 earned 59 cents to every man's dollar.
As a registered nurse, Carol makes less than men who fix cars, drive buses, or trim trees. That's why Carol wants the Equal Rights Amendment ratified.
There were several factors that wound up dooming the movement. First of all, there were already laws on the books that guaranteed women equal rights. In certain circumstances, such as when marriages break up, a case could be made that women's rights were and are superior to men's. Yet the perception of many is that there is an ongoing war on women, and women are faring poorly in it.
What I would say to people who think that women already have equality in our country is to really open their eyes, to look at the issues of pay equality, violence against women, pregnancy discrimination.
By all means, please, let's truly open our eyes and look at each of those issues. The never-ending claim of those who are supposedly fighting for women's rights is that women make anywhere from 78 to 87 cents for every dollar a man makes. In fact, the 1982 news report claimed it was just 59 cents on every dollar. If we indeed are going to open our eyes to this issue, then we will find that even the liberal Washington Post has debunked this faulty claim every year since 2012, calling it false. Study after study has found that when comparing similar experience, education, skill level, and commitment to job length of women and men, there is virtually no gender disparity in pay. None. In fact, in 147 America's largest 150 cities, young women make 8% more than men. All right, what about violence against women? Huge increase of rape in America. We're told now that things have gotten so bad that 1 out of every 5 women will be raped on an American college campus. If accurate, that would be a higher percentage of rape than what occurred during the Rwandan genocide. The good news is, it's not accurate. It's an outrageous falsehood. Sexual assaults in the United States have actually plummeted since the mid-1990s, falling by nearly 60%. Domestic violence is down 63%, and partner violence has dropped by a whopping 72%. As for pregnancy discrimination, I'm not even sure what that is, quite frankly. In general, reproductive rights and pregnancy discrimination are nothing more than euphemisms for abortion on demand. It was about these reproductive rights that a law student, Sandra Fluke, testified just a few years ago.
Without insurance coverage, contraception, as you know, can cost a woman over $3,000 during law school.
$3,000? Condoms are like 20 cents a piece. That is, if you want to do the math, about 15,000 sexual encounters. Law school generally takes 3 years to complete. To pull off 5,000 encounters a year, a woman would have to average almost 14 sexual encounters every day. So let's say 15 on a good day and maybe just 13 on a slow hookup day. Even on the days where you can't fulfill your normal allotment of hookups on Tinder, that doesn't leave you a lot of time to study case law. Now, for those who like to scream about the war on women, nothing gets them more angry than standing in the way of a woman's right to choose, to abort her baby. The fact is, nothing fits the description of war on women better than the actual killing of female babies. If pro-life advocates had their way, there would be 52 million more people on Earth today than there are. Slightly over half of these would be women. Living, breathing, life-experiencing women. Take a moment and hear them roar. If pregnancy discrimination is really about benefits available for female employees, current U.S. law dictates that a parent, nearly always the mother, can take 12 weeks of leave from her job. Some employers offer paid leave. For others, it's unpaid. But almost exclusively, it is women that take advantage of this benefit. Still, it's often claimed that the U.S. has the worst pregnancy benefit of any industrialized country on earth. However, in a nation built on liberty and personal responsibility, it's ludicrous to believe that the government would or should force employers to pay women who leave their jobs for 3 months regardless of the reason. It's even more foolhardy to expect that in a nation built on liberty, that the government would or should impose maternity leave taxes on others, on the childless, on the single adults, on the elderly, on anyone other than those who have chosen to start their family to provide the benefits to the mothers leaving their jobs. In the 1950s, only 19% of mothers with young children worked outside of the home. 81% of mothers stayed at home with their kids. The 1960s brought about a sexual and social revolution to the United States and to the American family. Discontented women like Betty Friedan began telling moms that they couldn't be fulfilled by raising a family, that in fact, something was wrong with them if that's all they did. Women, stay-at-home moms, suddenly under siege for not wanting to be more. They could have it all, but not by raising their family. They had to leave their family and enter the corporate world. It's truly ironic to note that even as women were being encouraged to leave their homes and enter the world of corporate America, the same feminist movement, as with so many other movements of the time, quickly became mixed with something other than the need for women to do something outside the home. The anti-corporate message of Marxism was also added to this mixture.
How did you account for women's subordination? What was your explanation for why women were oppressed?
We thought it was a mixture of men and capitalism. It seemed to me that if you were going to change women's position, you needed to change the society.
So somehow doing more than changing diapers became intermingled with Marxism.
I was in those small consciousness-raising groups, but at first, with my characteristic arrogance, I thought I was in them not because I was oppressed, but rather because I was going to bring them real politics. They needed an economic analysis. They needed Marx, they needed Engels, they needed all those things that I could bring them. And thank the goddess, they got to me before I got to them.
I was in a group which was a rather swotty group, actually, because we wanted to read about anthropology, and I had the idea that somehow or other anthropology provided some mystery key. Anyway, we all sat down and read Engels. Then we read Simone de Beauvoir, and so we read things and discussed them, and then we would have these heart-rending sessions about saying, we're not a proper consciousness-raising group like the Americans. We need to talk more personally.
So, as with many movements in the 1960s and 70s, Marxism and radicalism poisoned the direction that this movement would take. What may have started out as a way for women to discover new talents that they never knew they had, and to spread their wings to fly a little, morphed into yet another way for radicals to infiltrate American society. For those radicals, this movement had the added benefit of striking at the very foundation of American life, the American family. Whereas in the 1950s, 81% of mothers with young children stayed home with them. By 2000, that number had dwindled to 23%. And in the meantime, with no one, no mother or father in the home full-time, nearly every aspect of American life has suffered as a result. But there is a silver lining in the story. In the recent years, the downward trend of mothers choosing to work inside the home has been reversed. As of the latest year that statistics are available, 29% of American mothers with children have chosen to stay at home and raise their young families. It just may be that a significant number of American parents are realizing that there is a war being waged in this country, and it is a war on children, and that someone needs to fight the battle in the home.